Tooth fairies.
Berserkers.
Santa.
Crows.
Lend us your ears.
And a huge thank you to all of our Patreons.
Thank you to the Pit Fighters, the First Swords, and all of the Bright Stars. Truth and courage.
Hello and welcome to the channel today. We've got a very exciting chat coming up with Papa John Gwynne. Nice way there.
Hi, everyone.
And then Julie Crisp, agent and editor. Thank you so much, Julie, for joining us.
You're more than welcome.
We're really looking forward to here diving into, obviously, the agenting process, the editing process, some of the terrible things you have done to Papa Gwynne's characters, and a whole host of other subjects. Everything to do with books, and then a bit of Santa brought into there as well.
I'm not admitting anything.
This is a whole session of just you telling us your sins, Julie, who you killed.
What
Be honest, you're in a safe space.
Character.
It's just us, okay? No one else is listening. It's okay.
Yeah, we've orchestrated this just to get some recompense, basically.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I know you've never forgiven me, so...
Never.
It's true.
I'm like Aria, I've got a list. You're on there for some things that you've done. But we can come to that a little bit later. But for those who don't know, Julie, do you want to give a bit of an introduction about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a literary agent and I run my own company. I've been a literary agent now for about 9.5 years. And prior to that, I worked at Pan Macmillan for about 9-10 years as the editorial director there and sort of headed up their science fiction and fantasy list. And I took on John as an editor there. And actually, around this time was when I first got submitted Malice, and I read it over the Christmas period. And I remember thinking at the time, anything that can keep me occupied and distracted over the Christmas period has got to be pretty good. And I was just laid there on the sofa, just turning page after page after page. And when I went back into the office in January, I was like, we've got to buy this. So. Yeah, this period of the year always brings back sort of nice little memories of Malice. So yeah, I mean, that's it's a little bit, I suppose, about myself. I've been a genre fan since I was a kid. I think the first science fiction book I read was Dune. I grabbed it off my dad's bookshelves because it had a giant sandworm on the front cover. And then I was 10 when I devoured my first Stephen King, which was It. Which gave me nightmares probably for the next 3 years.
That's quite a young age to actually read it. That's quite scary.
Yeah. Let's just say I never walked past a drain particularly safely after that without checking there was nothing coming out from it. Yeah, but I mean, he's a fabulous writer. So it was as an avid reader and somebody who used to get through sort of 7 or 8 books a week, getting something like The Stand would take me at least a week and a half to get through. So it was quite good.
What was your favourite Stephen King book?
It probably is, let me see, Needful Things.
Oh, okay.
Needful Things, yeah, I really enjoyed that one. It was that concept that there's an item that everybody relates to. Everybody has that sort of perfect thing in their head that they really, really wish they had. And it's not always what it's cracked up to be. Obviously, it's quite a curse attached to it or something. But I did like that one. Quite dark, twisted.
I do have some things you've suggested. We'll come back to that. But before we get further, to kind of get a gauge of where you lean fantasy-wise, I have a very serious question. Do you prefer elves or dwarves? It's a big question, I know.
It's a big question. Do you know what? Probably dwarves, because they just seem a little bit more fun. I think an elf, I feel like, would be like your twin set and pearls, very upper crust and quite hard to relate to. And I'm just like, you know what? I could go out and get drunk with Gimli.
Yeah. So your dad has said dwarves as well, but in a way that I felt singled out because he said a big part of it is the beards, which he's not handed me his genes. So
Give it
Yeah.
time. Give it time.
Give it time. But yeah, both dwarves. Look at that.
Both dwarves, yeah. I think, the elves are just a little bit too stiff.
Yeah.
Sorry, all you Legolas lovers out there.
Not to say I don't love Legolas. I'm just saying.
Just a little bit less.
Yeah.
I just don't think he's quite as much fun.
You wouldn't want to go for a drink with him as much as Gimli, then?
No, I think Gimli would be entertaining and dancing on the tables by the end of the evening, or, under the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, spinning people around by their beard. It's a great night out. So, Julie, so you said that obviously you picked up Malice years and years ago. You were the one who spotted Papa Gwynne and you signed him. And obviously that's just, to us, has changed the landscape of fantasy forever, because what would it be without Papa Gwynne? But what really stood out to you about Dada's writing that really captured you and told you that you had to get this?
It originally came in from John Gerald, and he's got great taste. So I always took something that he sent in to me quite seriously. But I think for me, it was more that the writing was exceptional. And it was, even to this day, I can remember, and this is awful because I haven't read the book for ages and I can't remember whether that stayed in, was the moment when Corbin is on the grass watching a spider weave its web. And it was right at the start of the book. And I just was like, that's so lovely. That's the kind of thing I'd have done as a kid. I was bored, I'd watch a spider weave a web and kind of, think what was going on there. And I think that was just an immediate connection with that character then. And as it went through, it just reminded me so much of the books, or that sense of the books that I had read as a child, the sort of, the David Gemmell and the David Eddings and Catherine Kerr and, sort of a lot of those authors who really made me get lost in their worlds in the most perfect form of escapism there is, I think, for a fantasy reader. And of course, once the female characters were introduced as well, I was like, okay, now we're talking. They were feisty and entertaining, and it was, everything I was looking for. So yeah, I think it was just a standout read, and it really was one of those situations as an editor where you picked it up and I just ripped through the whole thing over the Christmas holidays.
And then you said, I think you should kill these 15 people in it.
All of them? I mean,
Maybe not
God,
all of
there
them.
were quite a lot of perspectives.
There were.
And there's nothing I feel works more in a book than A, sweeping the rug out from underneath a reader's feet, and B, investing them really, really heavily in a character and then making them cry. So,
But I think, just to interject here, I think people will be really grateful to Julie because it was on Julie's suggestion that I came up with one of the characters who turned out to be like a reader's favourite, Matt Gwynne. Because you got to the end of Malice, Julie, and I remember your notes. You said, I think a POV, another POV needs to die here. I'm not sure who, but I just feel like someone needs to die. So, obviously taking Julie seriously with all of her suggestions, I had a good think about that, and I chose we're into slight spoiler territory here.
I'll have something come up, it's fine.
Yeah, but so I chose to kill Castell. And originally that he was going to live, and the storyline that you get with Matt Gwynne was going to be seen through Castell's eyes. But so I killed him and had Matt Gwynne pick up the torch really and take over the POV. So he would never have been a POV if Julie hadn't suggested that I needed to kill another character. So I think people might be grateful to you for that, Julie.
They heavily engaged with him.
Yeah,
which was lovely, and he was actually one of my favourite characters as well, because he was just so kind of rough and ready and down to earth and gritty and didn't take any nonsense from anyone. Really said it as you see it. I think it was one of those situations at the end of Malice where you think, okay, if we're going to go through, and I think you had mentioned that there was potentially another perspective that would be coming in. to the second book, and I was like, how are we going to manage this? We've got so many. So just from a structural aspect as well, and in terms of juggling and making sure that all the readers would be invested in every single one of those characters. And I think that's something that you've done in your next books, has spent more time with those individual POVs and really made the readers care about them. I mean, Orca, for example, is just like what a character. Everybody I've spoken to who has read that book absolutely adores Orca. But then, the other POVs in that book are equally as meaningful to people. So,
yeah, you're quite good at characters, aren't you? Yeah, it's crazy that Matt Gwynne is probably your most.
I was like, thanks, damn me with fake praise.
But it's funny. Matt Gwynne did go down really well. A lot of people like him, so I think they would be grateful to Julie that he became a POV, but they might not be quite so grateful if they knew that it was Julie's idea that he died at the end of Wrath.
I couldn't believe it.
Edit this bit out, right, guys? Because
I couldn't believe it when I read the first draft. He makes it through. My favourite character. I was so happy. And I specifically remember the conversation where Papa Gwynne said, I've got some bad news for you. Julie has had a suggestion. And I was like, oh no, who's the casualty? And
because whenever we get an email from Julie, we'd always, I say we, obviously, because we were always over Dada's shoulder, like looking like, what's Julie said? And we're always so excited. And then Dada would submit the book. And then when the emails from Julie came after he submitted it, we would be terrified because we're like, what is Julie going to say? What are the suggestions? And it was a bad day, that one. It was a really bad day.
It was a bad day, but how much more memorable is that character for it?
No,
just kill him.
No, I agree. I feel like
I just think he had such an impact on people, and it was it wasn't just, he sort of fell in battle and it was trite. I think there was just such a natural storyline for him. And I mean, even I had a tear in my eye. Only a little one.
A tiny one.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think, we'd grown with this character over the last 4 books. And, I suppose while in some ways he was kind of like sort of a side character, he didn't feel that way because he was so much involved with everything that had gone on. And I think people really related to him that it's one of those things in that book that everybody still talks about.
Yeah, while subjectively my heart still hurts thinking about it, I think objectively it is very fitting, but I can't talk about it for too long.
I know, sorry, but as an editor, that's what you have to be, is completely objective and think, right, what can we do to really...
See, that's probably where I would fail. I'll just be like, I like this character. Let's leave them alive.
Let's just let them all live. See ever after.
The Disney ending. We needed
Disney
it.
ending. Okay. How many books in fantasy do you know that have the Disney ending?
Oh,
not enough.
I can't. I'm still looking.
Not many now.
But maybe moving a bit away from casting judgment and calling you out for the terrible thing you have done, I thought it'd be interesting to turn over to, obviously you receive a lot of submissions, and I thought people might find it helpful for a bit of advice. What are kind of the main things you look for, maybe things to avoid, and the things that really get you excited when you see it as well?
So I think the main thing that I look for, again, is that sort of connection between me and the author in terms of voice. I suppose because I've got an editorial background, I can look at a submission and can see beyond sort of some natural fixes that I think, okay, well, this could be made better, and maybe this isn't as strong here, and maybe, so I don't automatically turn something down just because I think the plot structure might not be 100% as it should be. But I think it's really about the writing style, the voice, those characters. If you get me absolutely caring about those characters, which is quite difficult to do in the first 3 chapters, then that's something that I'm going to be engaged with. And I think all my clients have had that. I certainly remember the first client I took on, which was Sam Hawke, and I think the first line of her book, which has still stayed with me, was like something like, "I was 7 the first time my uncle tried to poison me." And I was just like, okay, I've got to find out what happens now, because, it's just so such an impactful statement. You kind of want to see where it goes. So I think anything that comes in and has not a shock tactic, but something that's a little bit fresh and a little bit different in the beginning is always going to catch someone's attention.
So a hook that catches you straight away.
A hook, yeah.
Yeah, so you'd say you prioritize kind of authorial voice because, as you said, plot can be restructured, and so you're really focused.
Yeah. I mean, writing style is difficult because everybody has a very individual prose style, and that's why reading is so subjective. So there may be something that I would connect to that another agent would just be like, "Oh, no, that's not for me." And there may be something that I don't connect to that another agent will just be like, "Well, that's, I totally get this." But it's no different for readers. I mean, a reader doesn't go into a bookstore and love every single book that they purchase. So I think it baffles me sometimes that when agents say, it's a very subjective process, I feel like some writers might get quite offended by that, because it's just like, no, but if the writing's good and the plot's good, then you should just be able to take it on. And it's like, it just doesn't work like that. You have to be so passionate about what you take on, because my list is very limited. Most agents are, I get sort of, 1,500 submissions a year perhaps, and I'll take on maybe 1 or 2 authors.
Wow.
But the stats aren't great.
Yeah, I remember when I was a bit younger, I thought, Papa Gwynne, he's an author. He's going to have, the perfect recipe for me just to do it easily. And I said, "Oh, how do you write that like this?" And he said, "Just kind of go with my guts." And I was like, that's not
Great. It's the worst advice ever.
Well, there's 2 types of writers, aren't there? Do you remember there's a pantser and plotter and a pantser.
Yeah.
So it depends whether you're one of those. And this is 100% why I could not write. I love editing, but I could not write because I would never get past the first chapter. I would plot that book out to the absolute extreme, and it would be like, this happens in this chapter, and this happens in this chapter, and this character says this, and this character says that. I'd never write it. It would just be a set of really well-crafted notes.
An amazing plan.
Yeah.
So that leads me, Julie, to a question of how did you originally get into editing?
So after university, I suppose I wanted to do something with books. I knew that. And I suppose where I grew up and my background, publishing had never really been talked about or discussed. I remember going into my school careers, and the best that they could come up with was a librarian if I wanted to do something with books, or a teacher. So I mean, publishing had never even been mentioned to me. And I think it was at university when I found out what it was that editors actually did. And I was like, okay, that's the kind of thing that I definitely would like to do. So when I left university, I ended up working as a journalist for a tiny little company sort of based in the Docklands, writing articles about home working, ironically. And this was like, 25, 30 years ago. And covering the millennium bug. Shows how old I am. God. And then I went for an interview with Sue Fletcher over at Hodder and Stoughton to become an editorial assistant. And we got on great guns, and we were talking because she had like a bunch of Stephen King proofs in her office, and I was just like, oh my God, he's like one of my favorite authors. And she'd unfortunately already filled the position, but she did recommend me to her colleague, Carolyn Corhy, and I went back for an interview with her about a week later. And as soon as I walked into her office, it was like, shelves of Dune. There was an author I'd read called Melanie Rawn, who was like sort of a dragon thing. And so, of course, I just gushed, and Carolyn was like, right, you're working for me. That's it. And that's kind of where it started. But I knew I felt like it was hard then getting into it, and certainly still felt like there was very much a glass ceiling, I suppose, because 95% of who I was working with were Oxbridge graduates, which was not my background. So the imposter syndrome was very large at that time. And I think it has improved a lot in terms of the mix in publishing now, I think, is a lot better. But I still think that people do an awful lot of hard work for not very much money. And it's still considered to be it's considered to be a privilege to work in this industry, which means a lot of talented people are treated not so brilliantly.
And I have to interject there and just say that Julie is an exceptional editor. Exceptional. I mean, she's working with her has been a dream, really. It's fantastic, and it's made me the writer I am. I've learned a lot from Julie. But also in the industry, she has a fantastic reputation editorially. There are a few names who are always mentioned when the subject of editors are mentioned, and one is Julie. Gillian Redfern's another one, but Julie's always mentioned as one of the top editors.
That's fantastic. Very lovely to hear. I'm blushing.
So, do you remember the first edit you got back from Julie?
Oh, it's terrifying. It's seriously terrifying.
Oh, and it was all paper as well, wasn't it? Oh my God, I remember it was all paper then, and it was the proper red pen.
Well, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was. But I just had no idea what to expect. I was just completely new to it. Malice was the first thing I'd ever written, ever submitted. So I had no idea what to expect. And when I got the edit back, I was like, oh my word. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Since then it's got a bit easier, but you just start and go through it one scene at a time, one page at a time. And the great thing with Julia is that she never tells you, you should do this or you should do that. It's all suggestions. She's just so invested in the story and the character and the plot. She's like, would this character do this? Is this authentic to that character, or is this authentic to the story? Why are they doing this? Can you explain, the background of their rationale for making these choices or decisions? It's always questions that helps you to write a tighter, more authentic book.
But I think for me, it's always been a partnership. It's not for me to impose my will on an author's work and try and turn it into something that I feel what needs to be out there. It's more making sure that what the author is doing is convincing and realistic and is going to not be sort of contradictory or have sort of convenient plot lines. So it's still, I think it's very much, it is a partnership. I wouldn't try and be dictatorial about things. I might suggest quite strongly that if I felt something, definitely needed to happen, as in the ending of book 1, sorry. But I think, no, and I think what was always great was our conversations as well. So I never just kind of left you to it. It was very much like, okay, you get the notes, you read through them, you digest, and we'll have a conversation and we'll just bounce some ideas around. And I think a lot came out of that because I'd always suggest something and John would be like, okay, well, we won't potentially do it like that, but what do we think about doing it like this instead? And I was like, yes, that's so much better. I'm not a writer, but all I want to do is just sort of, generate those thoughts and, sort of the rationales behind it and see if we can come up with something maybe a little bit sharper or more original but I barely have to do that with John anymore. It's just like, this works.
When you go through a manuscript, do you usually read it once through and then return and edit, or do you kind of edit and write down your thoughts on the first time?
I usually read it through the first time round and then let it sit for sort of 24 hours. And it's had some very unusual dreams about books, I can tell you. It's sometimes you wake up in the morning and you'll just be like, okay, well, that yeah, that bit just didn't really gel for me. And if that was happening there, why did that thread over there not really get fully completed? Or so it just gives you the opportunity, I suppose, to take in the broad brush aspects of it before you start going through and going literally going in on a line by line basis, which I still do with all my clients.
Mm.
Yeah, Julie, could you just explain a little bit of that process? Structural edit, copy edit, line edit. Just part of that. Just explain that process to people who are maybe interested in that side of things.
Yeah, so I would say sort of a developmental edit, which is what I would do first of all, is more about the bigger plot structure issues. Are all these POVs needed? Do we need to cut some characters? Are there minor characters we can cut? Is the underlying plot thread carrying through well enough? Are there enough arcs and tropes to it? Are we being too convenient with some of our plot lines? So it's really the sort of the bigger sort of underpinnings of the novel, I suppose, that we would look at and I would go back with. And I would do that through marking up the script with a lot of comments and then sending a set of general editorial notes with them, sort of expanding about, okay, well, this isn't working. How about we tried something like this? Or and then we'd have a conversation, obviously, with the author and go into a bit more detail. And then after that, when the revisions come back in, that's when I would start to go through more on a line-by-line basis, cutting text if I felt the plotting was starting to slow in places, suggesting tighter phrasing, checking out for any sort of grammatical errors. So that's kind of, that would be my role. And then when it gets to an editor in a publishing house, they would do exactly the same thing. So a lot of the time, my clients will have two edits because I've already been through it once before I would send it out on submission. And then an editor would have their own thoughts about what needed fixing, and they would go through and do the same thing. But hopefully, so many of them are prepped by what I've already done with them that they don't freak too much at the editorial notes they then get from an editor. And then you mentioned copy editing and proofreading as well. Yeah, so when you go through the publishing process, traditionally, you would then have a copy editor who goes through and double checks all the grammatical aspects of the book, the punctuation, whether the commas are in the right place, whether you're using the possessive correctly, whether there are too many metaphors or similes. So it tends to be sort of the smaller word by word aspects of it, but they will also pull up if there's been sort of a plot line dropped or something. That then goes back to get checked, typeset, and then goes off to a proofreader who goes through, double checks all the copy editor's marks against the typeset script to make sure that everything's been implemented, and then goes through it again just to see if anything's been missed. So there's a lot of work. Publishers, it's not just, and this is why it takes 12 months or more to get a book from sort of, from pitch to publication, is because there are a lot of stages: covers, marketing strategies, sales strategies, PR strategies. There's a massive machine behind each individual book.
Yeah,
and Julie, can you talk us through how you juggle agenting and editing? Because both of them seem like such huge jobs, and you seem to do them both, which sounds impossible. So,
well, in part it's because I have a smaller curated list, so I don't take on huge amounts of authors because I want to try and sell everyone I take on. But I also make sure that every single one of them gets edited as well. So yeah, that does take time. I mean, I would say a proper developmental edit on something that's 150,000 words is going to take at least 2 to 3 weeks, at least. That's the minimum. And you're looking at doing sort of 25, 30 pages a day sometimes if you get bogged down and it's like on a line-by-line basis. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. There are some agents who edit quite lightly, and there are some other agents I know who put in the same level of editorial as I do. everybody's different. Everybody works differently. Some agents will have all the editorial notes in their head, so they'll basically just talk it through. I find it much easier to have something on the script, I suppose, that the author and I can follow together. But yeah, it is a juggle, but I actually really enjoy the editorial process, so I wouldn't want to give that aspect of it up just to concentrate on, shoveling the books out there as quickly as possible.
Interesting. Yeah, moving a little bit away from that, talking about obviously how much editing you do, it's mind-boggling the amount you must go through. Do you find that when you read for pleasure, you can kind of turn that side of your brain off, or is it always active, that critical part?
That's a great
question. That's going to get me into trouble.
I'm
not going to mention any names, I'm telling you now.
What book have you read recently needs a good old edit?
Don't. No, there's some books I will definitely read and I will absolutely adore and get so, Tasha Suri, for example, was it The Jasmine Throne? I could not put that book down. I absolutely adored it. And, I've got no idea if there were any plot issues with that because I've gone through it too quickly to even think about it. And there are some other books, I suppose, if there are plot issues with it, I probably wouldn't have stuck with it in the first place. So I will get so far and I'll just put it down. It would be a DNF. And that could be because I just don't relate to it as a reader, or, life's too short, or that, there was something structurally wrong with it that I just couldn't really get over.
Yeah.
Do you feel like a pressure on you to read and consume as much modern fantasy just to kind of keep an eye on where the genre is as a whole? Or do you just think, I'm just going to focus on what I love?
Well, luckily fantasy is what I love, so it kind of works out well. But no, I do read quite widely. I don't read nearly as much crime as I used to. And I think that's probably because actually the fantasy and science fiction market used to be quite small. So once you'd got one author, there wasn't a huge amount out there for you to experiment with. But it's so diverse now, and there are so many books coming out that you can really pick and choose what you want to be reading. So yeah, I'm currently engrossed in submission reading, but I think the last couple of books I've read, I absolutely adored, and they were what was it? It was Jade City, which I loved. Yeah. And what was the other one? I can't remember what the title was. This is awful because I remember the plot. I just can't remember the title. But yeah, there've been quite a few sort of mythological retellings that I've read recently, which I've really enjoyed.
Which ones in particular?
Well, that's the thing. I can't remember the title.
Two really like retellings, don't you?
Yeah.
A lot of that kind of subgenre.
It's interesting how it's kind of set alight in the last decade, really, especially obviously Greek retellings.
Greek retellings went mad. They seem to have died off a little bit, and certainly, I had an amazing author writing a Greek retelling, which is published by Harper in Australia and Harper in the UK as well. And that's done beautifully. But I remember when I was sort of submitting it, and I just couldn't understand because I thought, people, there's a demand for this. This is incredibly well written. And editors were just saying, oh no, we've got too much on the list. I was just like, you've got too much on the list. You've got one author writing in this area. And yet when it comes to crime, you've got 40 authors writing this area. I never quite understand the idea that you can have too many of one particular genre when there's obviously a massive demand from that genre. And I mean, look at romantasy. It's like everybody still seems to be looking for it, and that's got to be close to saturation point now. I can't imagine that it's not close to saturation point. But editors still seem to be keen to look for it. So.
Yeah, and with the mythology, obviously they're combating individual retellings, aren't they? So, like, if you walk into Waterstones now, you'll see a shelf of all different retellings combating different characters. So I imagine that'll be going quite a while.
Well, I mean, and you see it in the in different mediums as well. Was it Netflix? It had their Greek mythological retelling with Jeff Goldblum recently,
Yeah.
didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Which I adored. I thought it was exceptional, and they canned it after the first season. And I don't know. Maybe they're aware of something that we're not, and they think it's sort of finally plateauing out. But yeah, it seemed a real shame to me because I thought it was brilliant storytelling.
So that returns us back to the kind of the agenting process with submissions. Do you kind of keep in the back of your head kind of recent kind of trends, or do you kind of set that aside and focus on the authorial voice and those priorities you mentioned earlier?
I suppose part of me is keeping in the back of my mind trends, but not heavily, because having worked in the industry for so long, I know these things are cyclical. So if it's not a trend now, it probably will be in 5-10 years time again. And it's also, trends come and go so quickly, and everybody will buy a huge amount of one particular thing and then saturate the marketplace and not buy it for another 10 years. So no, I must admit, I do tend to actually stick with the stories and the voices and the writing that I love, because there's no guarantee that a trend, which is a trend now, will be a trend in 12 months' time.
I think particularly writers would love to hear, Julie, about what is the process of submitting to you. So they submit the first 3 chapters. Have you got any advice on those? Because do they write a cover letter as well?
Yeah, so I get asked this a lot, and I've been meaning to write a post about it for a while, and I will try and do that in the new year, because I see so many rookie errors still in submission letters. Even the basics, like just getting the agent's name correct. I mean, it doesn't bother me so much, but there could be some out there who are just like, you can't even be bothered to get my name right. I'm just gonna, file 13 it.
Yeah.
But I think quite a lot of the submission letters I've seen recently, and I don't know whether there's something on the internet which is telling people how to do this, or I know, a lot of writers groups are not telling authors to do this, but they've been, instead of writing a pitch, which sort of encompasses the storyline of their book, they will write their inspiration for why they wrote it. Which I suppose people are thinking maybe that's a more personalized way of getting your concept across. But for me as a reader, I want to read a back cover copy and get a sense that A, you know what your story is and your characters are, and you can write about it in a commercial way. So I think the whole kind of, I wrote this story because it was inspired by, I find quite dry. But I've seen a lot of authors do it recently. So as I said, I don't know whether there's something out there which is stylistically being taught that this is the way that you should submit. So yeah, it's difficult.
There's a lot of dodgy advice on Twitter/X that I think every day I see someone saying something that even though, me and Will aren't really in the industry, but we see a little bit more of behind the scenes than maybe, other people do. But like I saw on Twitter the other day, someone saying that you can't write, that you have to submit epic fantasy and it has to be below, like 90,000 words or something, or you're not going to get it published. And that's what people are telling them. So you do see a lot of different opinions, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, the not below 90,000 words. I understand that if it's for YA, maybe, or potentially romantasy, where they don't like sort of like the quite extended page. But if it's epic fantasy, then I don't have an issue with anything that's 150,000. I have an issue if it's 220,000 or 230,000, because I feel like that's just a little bit too self-absorbed, maybe. I don't know. It's like, I think anything that big can be probably cut into 2 books. And the realities of the situation is that printing costs have gone up a lot for publishers. So anything over a certain amount of pages is going to obviously cost more, and that all goes into the costing, and it makes a big difference to the margins. So Yeah, I totally understand when publishers are sort of saying, okay, well, it needs to come in around this kind of page length. And translation as well is also another big issue with an extended page length, because, of course, it costs more for a translator to translate it. So if you're looking at a 180,000 word manuscript, that's a lot of words you're going to be paying for as a foreign publisher, and so you maybe won't sell the rights as well if it was 120 to 150,000 words. And this is all stuff that publishers have to put into their costing. It's like, okay, are we going to get rights deals? How much do we think that will make? What do we think it's going to make in UK export? So I mean, they have to hit a basic margin. It's a business.
Yeah.
A message.
You've run out of questions, haven't you? You're like, oh, where do we go from here? She's getting too dark with it all.
Well, I'm thinking of, as someone who wants to be a writer, it's always scary seeing lots of different advice out there. So it's good to hear it from you, Julie. What you consider and stuff like that.
Just ignore everyone else. Just talk to me.
Yeah. That is the general rule, I think, that we have in our house. Just about anything, really. Just talk to Julie.
And just ask Julie. Apart from the sheep, I don't know anything about sheep. You'll have to deal with those yourself.
We'll leave those ones. Yeah, since Papa Gwynne got goats, we've noticed now, reading all of his books, that I think a goat dies in every single book, even though you never had goats then, which is a bit frightening. I don't know, was that your touch, Julie, or was it?
No, I didn't kill a goat.
I blame Julie.
Yeah, great. I just feel like there's a goat death missing.
There's a goat death missing. I love it. We do, yeah. The things that we have, honestly, I think we came up with a totally different character the last time we. And I'm sure, did it have something to do with goats? Was it Goat Hugger?
Yeah.
Like the goat dog.
Yeah, it was like Goat Hugger or something. Was going to be a new Viking.
I imagine if somebody heard your conversations with no context, they'd be very confused.
I'm probably a little concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like an author's search history. Just, yeah, it's worrying stuff.
No point looking at it.
Yeah, and an editor's search history is not much better either, because we're fact checking everything as well. So yeah, I'm sure GCHQ have had huge amounts of fun with my search history at some stage or another.
So, Julie, as you said, you're going through submissions at the moment. Do you usually combat these in phases then, where you have a phase of looking at a few specifically editing and then back to submissions and then kind of a cycle, or do you do them gradually?
No, I have to. I mean, if an edit comes in from a client, that's got to take a priority. So then my submissions take a back seat. And I will try and read a few every evening. But when you've got 900 or so to work through, and as I said, I'm back down now to about 150 left. And those are the submissions where I've read the submission letter and the synopsis and thought, okay, well, I would like to have a little bit more of a time to actually read the full 3 chapters on this. Those are the ones that kind of go into my maybe pile. And those take just a little bit longer because, of course, I'm reading the full 3 chapters of 150 manuscripts, and each read is probably 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then writing rejection for it. So, yeah, it takes time.
Would you say that they're very important in another aspect, in that you'd rather choose something a bit more personal to what you love as a reader?
In terms of what I take on as a client? Yeah. I mean, I don't think any agent would ever take on a book that they felt had got massive commercial potential, but that they didn't enjoy. Because we have to work on these books so closely, and we have to work with the author so closely, that it's not going to be an enjoyable or fair experience for either of us if that editor or agent is not completely invested in the book. When you think how many times I will read a client's manuscript, the first edit, and then I usually read it as well when it comes in book form, because I just kind of want to make sure that everything's gone okay with it. Then, that's 2 or 3 reads of a single manuscript. Now, if I'm not enjoying that book, why would I want to go back and read it three more times, or 2 more times?
That's just torture.
Well, I have one more question, which is going a little bit away from the editing, but to do with Papa Gwynne's works. If you could pick one character of Papa Gwynne's books who you love the most, who would you choose?
Who I love the most?
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be the Tooth Fairy. That's Leslie.
Oh, I love Vesely.
She's awesome. She's just so, like, loyal to a T. And then if anyone turns on her or her friend, she's gonna rip their teeth out. I kind of feel like, I relate to that.
I remember when you told Mama Gwynne your idea for the Tooth Fairy, and she was holding her mouth, just freaked out, hating the idea. You think of some sick things, don't you?
Okay, maybe.
Does it ever scare you, Julie, when you kind of talk to the authors and they're so lovely, and then you read their work and it's so dark and disturbing to see that difference?
Not my clients, thankfully, but I do remember when I was at a crime fiction party, and I just finished reading Karen Slaughter, and I was a massive fan. I thought she was absolutely fabulous, and I met her, and she's holding her newborn baby very beautifully, and it was just like the absolute, epitome of stunning motherhood. And I was just like, oh my God. I said, how can you write the things you write? And then she says, I literally live my worst nightmares through my books. And I was just like, that makes sense. Okay, I get that.
Yeah. Well, luckily we know you're not as terrifying as...
I wasn't Karen Slaughter, I lied. Sorry, it was Mo Hader.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I need to read some more crime, but mostly fantasy, sci-fi, historical fiction. The list is just endless.
Yeah, it's just
Well, you guys are quite well read, aren't you? I mean, you have a lot. I see the pictures on your YouTube. It's like, these are the ones we're reading this month. Yeah.
Well, I've just seen you're reading this for your next term at university, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, scary. But also, last few months there's been a bit of a war in the house in that I've got quite a few bookshelves in my room. I'm spoiled with the biggest room in the house, but there's just not enough shelves. So
he's complaining that his room's not big enough to keep his books in.
So you have just bought me as an early Christmas present 2 more shelves, haven't you?
2 bookcases.
2 more bookcases. Sorry.
Bookcases, shelves. Like, here's a couple of planks of wood.
Yeah.
So I actually blame you for getting me into reading.
You would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Shelves don't work for Will, because Will put all of his Robin Hobb collection on the shelf, and it actually crumbled on him in the middle of the night, and nearly died. Yeah.
Killed
great
by
way to
Robin
go out.
Hobb. She's so lovely.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, fantasy and science fiction are not slim books. I mean, you could use them as a deadly assault weapon. If you're going for, you want to maximize your shelf space, go for a nice literary read or something. It's like 250 pages at the most. You're good. 300. It's your epic fantasy.
Yeah, maybe.
Takes up a lot of space.
They do.
Just stick to Julia Donaldson, and then you're fine. You can fit loads of them on.
In your career as an editor and as an agent, Julie, has there ever been a pinch me moment when you've met someone, even though you're obviously so into the industry? Is there still some of those moments that stand out?
Yeah, there was. I think it was at the SFX Weekender, and I got to say hello to Terry Pratchett in person. And I think that was just, my mind was absolutely blown, because he is still my go-to reader when it comes for comfort reads. And I must have read every single one of his books at least 4 or 5 times, maybe more. And it's just one of those, if the world's a little bit dark and the world's a little bit sad and a bit grim, you just lose yourself with, Vimes or Granny Weatherwax, who's just like the most perfect character and so acerbic. So that was a pinch me moment. Was I actually got to sort of have a 10-minute conversation with him, which was incredible.
Wow, that must have been amazing. And as a reader who's only read Mort and Guards, is there one book of his that you would recommend me? When I love both of them.
The Witches.
The Witches, okay.
Yeah, that's the start of the sort of the Granny Weatherwax kind of storyline, and she's just such an epic character.
I'll keep that in mind. You actually, wasn't Terry Pratchett doing a reading at the same time as you had to, and Malice had just come out?
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I had a
It was
reading
Dada's first reading. Yeah,
Oh my God, was that at the
In Brighton.
Brighton
was-
Con.
Oh, yeah. Was that where the room was almost empty because he was? Yeah, I
I think
remember
there was
that.
4 people, including Dada.
So you kind of have to forgive it when
Yeah,
it's
but-
Terry
yeah,
Pratchett. Yeah.
of course.
To be fair, I think Adrian Tchaikovsky had a similar situation that day as well, and there had been a clash with Terry, and
Yeah.
he did not fare that much
That's
better.
the
It was
It's
yeah, that was hard.
Terry Pratchett.
It only went up though, Dada, so that was good.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it couldn't have got much lower.
Oh, Julie, thank you so much for listening to us badger you with lots and lots of questions about agenting and editing and everything else in between. Dada, is there any advice you would have for up and coming authors for who want to work with Julie?
I mean, just
Shall I cover my ears?
no. I mean, really, it's Julie said it all. It's Julie's. She has to engage with the characters in the story and the voice. So that it's very hard to pinpoint advice for that. It's kind of a lifetime of reading and writing that your voice comes from. So you can't really give like this is the thing to do advice. Just my advice to writers is, and I don't like to give advice because there are so many ways to do it. There's no science really. Everybody finds their own way, but I'd always just say write what you want to read.
Yeah.
You feel passionate about, and hopefully you'll find other people that are passionate about that as well. And with Julie, I mean, her comments are always about driving the plot. So make sure that whatever you write and whatever characters are in there, that they are essential to the plot, or they will go.
Not easily killed off.
Yeah, they'll die a nasty death.
Yeah, and even if they're really great characters, they may still get killed off as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
I will say, boys, if you wanted as well, if anybody puts comments at the bottom and has questions for me, I will be happy to answer sort of any questions that come up.
thank you, Julie. And everyone you heard, this is your chance to get an answer from Julie Crisp. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. We've held you to account, so thank you for staying and leaving when we're doing that. And thank you for your insightful thoughts into the editing industry and agenting industry, and also some of your stories as well, meeting Terry Pratchett, how you got into editing. It's been really lovely to hear about. And I've forgiven you slightly for some of the terrible things you've done.
Only
Just slightly.
slightly.
A little bit. I'll just cry myself to sleep about Macbeth still. But it'll be all right. But yeah, thank you so much for giving up your time tonight, Julie.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been fun. It's always fun with you guys.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to everyone who's watched. I imagine you've learned a lot watching this, whether you're just interested in the kind of relationship between Papa Gwynne and Julie Crisp in the Faith and the Fallen or Blood and Bone and Bloodsworn Saga, or editing and agenting in general. Thank you, everyone, and truth and courage.
Truth and courage.
Truth and courage.
Bye.